All right, welcome to another Red Talk. Really excellent discussion from Redwood City. My name is Shane McLaughlin, and today we dive deep into the ethical dilemmas that AI is creating in business, in entrepreneurship, in education, in everyday life. The title of our talk today is Automation with a Conscience. Can we build ethical AI? Because AI tools are writing our emails, summarizing our research, imitating celebrities, even in some cases simulating companionship. So the line between what's real and what's artificial is blurring fast. And I'm so fortunate to have one of the most renowned ethics experts, a columnist and Harvard lecturer, Jeffrey Seglin, here today. I'm going to just give you a quick introduction to give some folks a little bit about your background. Acclaimed columnist, writer, and educator specializing in business ethics, writing, and leadership, Jeffrey Seglin is co-author of over a dozen books and currently a senior lecturer emeritus at Harvard. I can say that right, emeritus at Harvard Kennedy School. Jeff's definitely one of the leading voices on ethics in business. His column, The Right Thing, started as a monthly column in the Sunday New York Times and then became weekly from 2004 to 2010. And you're still writing it, and it's syndicated and appearing on your blog and other places. Jeff's a frequent speaker on the topic, and his book, The Right Thing, Conscience, Profit, and Personal Responsibility in Today's Business, was recognized by Library Journal as one of the best business books of the year some years back. Jeff has a master's degree in theological studies from the Divinity School at Harvard University, a Bachelor of Arts degree in English from Bethany College in West Virginia, and an honorary doctorate from Bethany College. And I had the pleasure of working with Jeff in my first role out of college, serious job at Inc. magazine as an intern and then a reporter. It's great to be talking to you, Jeff, and thank you for being here.
Thanks, Shane. It's great to be here.
Great.
It's great to see you.
Yeah, it's good to catch up after all these years. I just wanted to start by asking what first interested you in writing and exploring the intersection of ethics and business?
Well, everything I've done is serendipitous. I mean, I'm teaching. I'm just recently retired as an emeritus lecturer at the Kennedy School, but I ran a communications program at a public policy school, and my graduate work is in theology. So makes no sense. But when I was at Inc. magazine, which is a business magazine, which is where you and I met, as one of the editors, I was often charged. We sometimes responded to the letters that we would get from readers, and we would run the letters and have a small response. And I noticed that we got letters regularly from people who thought that some of the people we profiled were taking shortcuts or doing things that were slightly unethical or not right. And then we would run those letters, and then we would get a whole series of letters in response to those that said, "What are you talking about? Everybody in business tries to seem bigger than they are, or to make things, work because they're working on a shoestring." So the first time I wrote about ethics, I wrote a series of pieces called Black and White for Inc. And we wrote about a guy, I wrote about a guy who had to make the decision. He found out he remanufactured airplane engines, and he had to make a decision about whether or not to report to his board that the FCC had found that some of his engines might have caused failure in some of the engines, and he was just about to be up for an audit. So we sort of wrestled through, and he decided not to report that to his board, and we sort of walked through him about how they made that decision. We did others on how people dealt with employees with substance abuse problems, and then a whole series of them. And then I left and took a year off of Inc. and did a fellowship at it was at the Center for the Study of Values in Public Life at Harvard. This would have been in 1998, to go write a book on business ethics, and kept writing some columns for Inc. And then at that time, Jim Schachter, who's now the CEO and president of New Hampshire Public Radio, so send him lots of money because they're more in need than ever.
Of course.
He was my first editor, and he was redesigning the Sunday business section of the New York Times. And he actually called me as a reference for someone else he was trying to hire who didn't want to move to New York. And he called me to ask, how do I get John to move to New York? And I said, I don't know, you're going to have to move the Times to DC. I don't know. It was before everything was online. And so he said, well, what do you do? And I told him I'm doing this fellowship on ethics in business. And he said, would you be interested in trying to write a business ethics column for us? And I did. And that was the Right Thing column. And it started appearing in September 1998. And then, as you said, it ran there and then in the New York Times Syndicate. And it still runs in newspapers through the Tribune Media Syndicate around the world.
You touched on something. I guess I want to jump right into it. And bootstrapping, that was a term at Inc. magazine that came up a lot. Small businesses needed to be agile and scrappy. There were some that were even totally misrepresented themselves to get into the magazine. And now with AI, though, it's so easy to misrepresent yourself, to send bots out to do bad reviews of competitors. What are the dangers you're seeing of AI, and how do entrepreneurs and small businesses need to walk that line?
Well, even back in the day when things were less techy, but although if you include telephones, that's technology. But the line is crossed when you lie. So you clearly don't. It's not just that you don't want to run afoul of regulations, because if they were doing an IPO at some point and screwing with the SEC, obviously not a good thing to do. But that's not the only reason. The other reason is that you're trying to build credibility with your customer. You don't want to lie to your customer. There was a guy back in the past, I think his name was Rush Kidder, who said he never has to lie because his vocabulary is so big. Um, there's a way to have a positive outlook. There's a way to sort of present something as sort of enthusiastic and try to appear, just confident, without crossing that line of lying. So lying has never been good. The challenge now is it's easier to do it faster. It's never been good to trash employees. I think we did a piece. There was a piece about a company who was featured in one of the Passion for Excellence books, who had the sign up on their on their on their floor that said steal ideas shamelessly, and the idea is take good ideas from your competitor. Well, that company actually was later brought up and charged and sued because it took that too far. It actually hired interns to get hired by the competing company to actually steal the ideas, which is not what that means. So I think that people lying is not good, stealing is not good, but trying to present yourself positively is obviously part of what you're trying to do with the whole thing. You don't want to be a woe is me. We don't know if we can do that. That's not really going to sell a product. Now with bots, it's very possible to do all of that, and the pressure becomes on the customer or the financier, or the anybody, the journalist, to do more due diligence than ever before. It's very easy to become lazy and complacent, but if you do that, AI can become very just come back to blow up. AI can be useful, but without doing the due diligence on it and knowing how to use it. To use it well, it requires critical thinking. It requires knowing the questions to ask. It requires checking the source. It requires making sure that the information it gives you is accurate. If you don't do that, that's when we run into problems, because that's akin to just being lazy and then ultimately misrepresenting yourself.
Mhm. And you touched on IP, and the notion of what is IP is really getting blurred. Uh, if you go into Midjourney and ask it to create an image of Homer Simpson, it will create Homer Simpson. And there are lawsuits happening for major media.
There's one,
Yeah.
yes, Sarah Silverman's bringing one, George R. R. Martin, John Grisham,
Mhm.
whole slew of writers are bringing them, and so far they're not getting very far. The place where they seem to be getting some traction is the downloading of their copyright works without permission,
Oh, I see.
and that's where they are getting some traction for it. But yeah, I mean, they're basically, if you take it beyond that and you look at some of these closed systems who have a lot of data and databases, they can just clone those and create AI tools that just scrub everything and just lift it without giving it
Attribution.
credit. And it's IP is important, and people should get credit for the work they put into it, and they should get paid for it, or at least credited for it, or asked for permission to use it.
Mhm. And even when we use ChatGPT on our subscriptions, um, the terms of service mean that they can, unless you tell it not to train the model, which I don't know works or doesn't work, they're taking that, all the writing that I've done, and I'm sure that you've done, that if you've used these tools, it's still training that model. And what does that mean for the future of IP? Is there like a shift?
You can- Yeah, they're taking that. They're taking that. They're taking anything I put in there. But they're also, because the Times is online, and because the Tribune Syndicate is online, and because the column appears in all these places that remain online since, what is that, 27 years? There's 27 years of stuff out there. And if you say to it, I'm not a particularly well-known person, but if you say to it, write a right thing column, which is the name of the column, write a right things ethics column in the vein of Jeffrey Seglin, you will get it in less than a minute. You'll get a column. It doesn't know me, and it will make things up in the column, so it will hallucinate. But it will give you a column that's structured very much the way I structure a column and approach the issue very much the way I approach an issue, because it's basing it on all that other stuff.
Let's talk also about you're a teacher, you got students, you've been teaching,
Try to teach.
try to teach.
I try. They give me an office on campus, but I still teach. I was with the mid-career students on Wednesday. I spent an intimate writing workshop with 220 mid-career students, talking to them, and they're anxious about AI. They want to know what the rules are, and the challenge is that we're all figuring out what the rules are. So, for example, I have no problem. AI is a broad topic, and I have no problem with anyone, students using Grammarly to sort of give them ideas on where they might be grammatically off in their pieces. No problem with the light edit for that stuff. I do have a problem with them saying to ChatGPT or Grok or whatever they use, the assignment is to do this, write me a piece that might appear in this publication that's this many words, that uses this structure, and just lets it do it and then doesn't read it. Um, that you don't learn anything if you do that by itself, and it's not going to be, especially because I teach a course on opinion writing, it's not going to really have the opinion of the person doing it unless they go through and they coach it enough to sort of tease it out to make it resemble what they're doing. And by the time they get through that process of doing that, it would have been taken a shorter amount of time to just write the damn thing themselves. So it really takes some critical thinking to use this well. There are really good uses for it I think in an academic setting. If you've written an academic paper and you're trying to figure out where to place it, you can ask, I've written a paper on this topic. What are 12 different journals I might place this in, or what are 12 different magazines or newspapers or online sites I might place this in? The challenge is that when it gives you those results, you need to make sure those publications actually exist, because it does still make things up. And you need to make sure they're still in business to do that. But that kind of stuff we do now. We Google it. We Google it and say, list these publications. It's just an effect. It's a very highly effective search engine with dubious results.
Yeah, and even
in the early days, we felt the same about Wikipedia, right? Everybody was dismissing Wikipedia and saying it's no good, it's no good, it's no good. And we've learned to use Wikipedia with some skepticism. We know that the source notes are the most useful part. We know that a lot of what appears on Wikipedia is a good start, but some of it is crap. And the challenge as a researcher is to not accept anything on face value and to do the work of questioning things and questioning sources. So
the sources have become so easy because now even on Google, it will give you an AI generated summary that won't even take you to a site, and those AI generated summaries hallucinate.
I mentioned to you I wrote a short piece because I have to write a weekly column. I write about a variety of different things, but I did write about this and mentioned I'm not a basher of AI, but the importance of checking stuff. So I did ask it to write it as if it were writing an obituary for me and to give me information. And it gave me a wife named Lynn. My wife's name is Nancy, so she was surprised. Made up names for my four children. Said that Lynn and I lived in New York City for 2 years in the early 1980s. I was in graduate school in New York. I never lived in Manhattan. I lived outside of it, but I've never lived in Manhattan with Lynn. I've never lived with Lynn. I don't know who Lynn is. And it also said that I did a fellowship at an ethics center at a university in Orem, Utah. I've never been to Orem, Utah, although I may get in touch. So it made up all this stuff that anybody else could have written, looked at, and thought, I'm going to use this as a profile for this guy. You could have done that today when you introduced me, and just said all these things if you just accepted it at face value, because it just hallucinated. And that's a challenge. That's a challenge for everybody. Sometimes when people are using it, it's just sloppy. I mean, in an academic setting, if you're going to cheat, at least be responsible in the way you do it, because if you turn in a paper and there's phrases in there that say, as an LLM chatbot, I cannot provide that. If you leave that phrase in your piece, you're probably going to fail.
Wow. Yes.
So, again, there's no excuse for getting lazy. I think it's the responsibility of professors to be very clear on what's permitted and not permitted in each class, because school is different. You're there to learn something. There's academic integrity. If you're writing a piece for a publication, you don't always you credit, but you don't always cite the source and footnotes. You might do that in an academic paper. So there are things you want to do because as a professor, you want to know how they're thinking. You remember from the days at Inc. when before a lot of online stuff, we used to have to turn in folders full of backup information with our fact checking material.
Right. Yes.
And that's the kind of thing that's like an academic thing. Yeah, the professor wants to know, how did you get to this point? What's your thinking here? What did you put into this? And if you just have chatbot kick it out, or ChatGPT kick it out, or Grok or whatever you're using kick it out, you don't know. You don't learn anything. You learn that you can ask a question. You don't even know that you're not asking good questions to coach the right thing out of it. So it's a challenge. There was early on, back in the day, there used to be an FCC rule, an equal time rule, where radio stations had to have public interest on their stations. They don't anymore. So they would relegate them. A lot of time they would fill that with like interviews of authors, and they typically would run them very early in the morning. And there was a great example, and I can't remember who it was, where there was a CEO who had a memoir out, and it was ghostwritten, which is fine. It was ghostwritten. And as the interviewer was interviewing him, it became clear that the CEO couldn't answer the questions. And I believe the interviewer said to him, "I don't care if you don't write your book, but I really care if you don't read it." And that we've gotten to that on steroids now, where people don't know what it is they're producing, and they really need to take the time to think about that.
National newspapers, the Chicago Tribune Syndicate published a list of summer reading books, 10 of which didn't exist because
Yeah.
somebody just, yeah, like what kind of guardrails? What's going on? Having worked in media for so long, like what needs to change?
Well, that's inexcusable, right?
What's up?
That's inexcusable.
Yeah,
That's inexcusable. There should be an editor at every stage. Even though I don't work full time for the Tribune Syndicate, I have an editor. His name is Zach, and if something looks questionable, he will ask me. He doesn't do a heavy edit on stuff because I'm old and cranky, but he will question stuff. There is a human being to check that. And without that guardrail, without a human being to check that, so many publications, so many newspapers have gotten rid of their copy desk, which used to be the guardrail. And then the guardrail was the reporter or writer himself. But if that reporter or writer himself or herself or themselves is a bot, there is no guardrail. You could say to the LLM, don't make stuff up, but that's a risk. You don't know if they're listening to you or not.
because it's wired to please us, and it's
Yeah,
it it's almost like even though values are supposedly built in and it's told to do the right thing, at the end of the day, it's just trying to get content out or do the tasks that it's tasked with. Um,
right.
and on the media front too, the interesting thing, AP, Disney, apparently a lot of companies are creating their own AI platforms so that they generate their own AI content. And what's your advice for creatives who try to remain relevant? Because obviously the jobs are disappearing. There's less need for writers, and companies are creating
Well,
their own.
yeah, I think that's going to be the case with that. With freelance writers, I can imagine that's going to happen with the databases like LexisNexis and everything else, because we did have a lawsuit back in the 80s or 90s where publications were just selling everything to LexisNexis to run, and there was a lawsuit from the writers saying, well, we only got paid to publish the publication, so they had to change the contract. I think what this is akin to a little bit is the writer's strike that just happened in Hollywood, right? Because there was all the talk of AI, and there was all the talk of repurposing their materials, and there was all the talk of I think they need to get smarter about their contracts. They need to get smarter about what they're writing. But there will be what is the word? Creative destruction. There will be things that happen and happen fast. I think one of the values that happens if you're a creative, if a company is really sold that this is the way they want to go, a really valuable person becomes the really gifted and really smart and really creative thinker who knows how to use these tools effectively. So if you're Disney or if you're AP or if you're any number of people who say they want to produce quality content, you want someone who wants to make sure that you get the best quality content out of that as possible, and that takes some doing. It's not just saying, um, let's do a script with, Grumpy's love affair. Well, the script's going to be crap. But if you have somebody who's there, it's coaching it, knows the character, and is doing all of that, they're effectively script doctoring, but they're doing it with that way, and they'll know what's crap and what's not. So people sort of becoming clear on how to use it become very valuable. But there's no way to protect a company from doing that other than occasionally lawsuits and strikes.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of, I spoke to a friend, even an older friend than you, a guy named Tom Hagee does a litigation podcast, and he does a lot of writing for law firms, and he's just saying the number of cases of litigation dealing with AI and intellectual property are just growing. There's just a lot of them. How that'll fall out is hard to say, but lawyers are going to make a lot of money out of this.
Yeah, and it seems like is there going to be an emergence of some type of standards or oversight agency or something? Because it seems like it's so big and it's affecting so much of society that there has to be some kind of regulation.
It doesn't seem like that's the way it's going under the current administration. I think there's a lot of leeway being given to that. I think it would be smart of companies to do that themselves and get better about that. If they're going to do that, they should have guardrails. They should not assume that this is like that we don't need the thinking that people can do anymore. Because if they want to maintain quality, we're not yet at the point where the stuff being turned out on first blush is good. And we're running the risk of there being not just inaccurate, but irresponsible information that goes out if someone doesn't check it.
Yeah, it's really easy.
Even journalists,
Yeah.
that we have to check their work. Why would we think we don't have to check this work? And you're going to miss out on the creativity that people have. So, it's the kind of thing where it used to be that thing where you had the writing sample you did for the standardized tests. And if you were a really bad writer or a really exceptional writer, you wouldn't do really well because the test is geared towards a formula that's mediocre. So do we really want mediocre stuff? And is it really going to help us when we talk about news deserts and reporting on local news? Can it really replace that? I don't think it's there, and I don't think it can. And I think people are still needed.
There's an interesting study I read about recently that kind of really says large companies are expecting their employees to work more, and therefore they're more stressed. And they don't. The employees that are surveyed say AI actually is creating more work for them. Conversely, a study from Salesforce said like out of 10 small business entrepreneurs are making money because they can automate their social media. They can pull market research that's really helpful. Can you talk about some ways that you think entrepreneurs or others could really benefit and leverage AI in innovative ways we're not thinking about?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure how they use it as a product sales, but in terms of doing market research, if you get a white paper, or this is in any field, but imagine what you could do using AI well. You could
Mhm.
take that market research, and some of the better bots will actually take that research if you put it in there, and it will just focus on that research. It won't use outside sources, so you're using the research you bought. If you ask it for a 2-page executive summary, that can be a real time saver because then you're actually looking at it. You're not having to skim. So that saves you real time to do that. It can help you with things like that. And that seems to be a legitimate use of it, where the CEO or the marketing department doesn't need to read through massive quantities of stuff. If you're looking at, some of these guys who are looking at how customers behave, and they're looking at behavioral science studies, which are in academic journals that are sometimes unreadable to anybody other than who's trained in social science.
Right.
It can take those and translate those into English and do a decent job of it. That still means you have to buy the journal article from whatever site you're getting it from, but you're getting it and it's sort of translating for you, so you're not misinterpreting it. So that seems to be a good use of that. It also can be a use for asking what else do you know that's out there, to sort of do a sweep of competition,
Mhm.
to do that, to look at all that stuff, and that stuff we used to do, and but first in an analog way. We would order newspapers from around the country or
Yeah.
magazines from around the
Yeah.
country, and then we did it in a digital way, and then through like closed databases, and then we did it through Google and Bing, and what is the other one? The one that doesn't follow us around, the one who doesn't
Oh,
have ads.
DuckDuckGo or
Yeah,
yeah.
DuckDuckGo. We can do that. but now it has a way to sort of shorten the period where we're doing that. I think that's a really effective use to do that.
And
It's not going to tell you what product you have that that is going to make people beat a path to your door. It may be able to look at your financial statements and tell you where you can look at saving some costs. Or it can look at, like, if you have like 3 years worth of financials, it can point to aberrations. But Quicken kind of does that already. Um, so there are uses for it. I think in terms of the people being overworked, people are overworked,
yeah, yeah.
and I think part of the AI being I know this is among students. There's a free floating anxiety that we just don't know. We know AI is going to do something. We know it's going to be revolutionary. We just don't know what it's going to do. And if you're a worker and the fear is put into you that not only will it change things, but it might do away with my job, you're just nervous about it. But they're not getting clear direction other than to use it. So I think more thoughtfulness needs to come in of how we want to use this.
How do you use AI?
Well, I used it just to write my obituary. Um, if I if I'm looking for, like, if a student or a colleague says, are there places that I've written a piece, and they don't follow my advice and choose their audience first, which I always advise them. But if they've written a piece and it's pretty good and they're looking for an outlet for it, I can ask ChatGPT, I can ask AI, give me a list of ideas of places that might run a piece that covers this topic. And then I can look at it, and then but I have to look at it more closely to see, do they take outside submissions? I need to do more digging on it, but it will give me a first list on that. If I'm thinking about a particular topic and I've done research for it, and there are like a dozen different ways I can go about it, I can say, what are some, these are how I'm thinking about this. Am I missing anything? It won't write the piece for me, but it'll tell me if I've thought through enough. And often it doesn't give me anything that is particularly unique. I can also say, has anybody else written on this topic? Which is helpful. Are there studies that show how much the average person, if you averaged out what the average donation is to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, it can tell me what the average donation to corporate public broadcasting is, and then I can look for the source of that. So I can look for it for that kind of information. And just Grammarly is something I don't really use, but I think my students do, and it's fun. At the Kennedy School, 59% of them are international students. Often they're better with grammar and usage than the domestic students, but it's a great way to sort of get that. And we all have bad habits with grammar and usage, and if you want to be right about it, it will do it. And not only that, it will tell you the reason why it's off. It won't rewrite it for you, but it will say there's a subject verb agreement problem. There's an inconsistency in this.
That's
So I think for light edits, it can be very useful.
that's great. One telltale sign I've heard that something is generated by ChatGPT is overuse of M dashes. So
I've heard that as well. And what's funny is that for the last 6 or 7 years, I've been beating up on my students to tell them that their generation uses M dashes and semicolons too much. So I don't know how much of that is the chat is the stuff that's being fed in, and how much of that is just it thinks that's what we want. Because more and more students use it, and sometimes they don't have a closing M dash, so they're trying to set something off, and it starts. It's like reading something that starts with a quotation mark and there's no closing quotation mark, and you have no idea where it ends. So you just have to use it really carefully. And then I've also seen studies that said, or people have sort of said that it uses that, and that's the way you tell if it's ChatGPT. So edit those out, and people won't know. There are other ways to tell. If a piece doesn't have any personality, if a piece is very formulaic, if a piece is eager to please, if if it uses a lot of throat clearing, you might have thought this, but this, or I believe that. Well, why would you write it if you didn't believe it? There's a lot of sloppiness that's in it, and you can sort of get that as a clue.
yeah,
So it's bad writing is bad writing.
and good writing still kind of shines through. And AI is not at a point where it can conduct interviews and pull the research
Certainly can't get the voice or know what's in the
in the heart.
what the person is thinking or know their stories. So it won't know. You could write a really compelling story about the startup of a podcast in California in a studio where you're working. It won't know what you went through to get there.
Yeah. Exactly.
Um,
There's a loneliness epidemic declared by the Surgeon General 2 years ago, and a people there's more and more stories of people using AI therapy and chatbots to help with counseling and help to with depression and mental health. What are your thoughts on those? Because their technology is keeping us so connected, yet we're lonelier than we ever have been because there aren't real relationships.
got exasperated during
Yeah, COVID.
the pandemic.
Yeah,
Technology was great because we never missed a class when we were teaching. So, but Zoom's stock went through the roof. But it was a way to keep us connected. But people weren't meeting in the hallway. I think there's a danger. There was early on with at MIT, they used to have the Lisa listserv thing. It was a therapeutic thing, but it was very basic, and you would type questions into it like, um, "I'm afraid," and it would respond by saying, "What are you afraid of?" And you would say, "I'm afraid of the dark," and it would respond by saying, "Tell me about your dark." And that was, but now it's gotten to the point where it feels like a person's talking to you, and it doesn't replace a human being. There's no way a chatbot can do that in the same way that WebMD cannot diagnose you. All it can do is scare the hell out of you and maybe tell you what you might have, which it might be a paper cut and it might be terminal cancer. You need a doctor to work you through this stuff. It might tell you what to avoid. It might tell you not. We had a rabbit in our backyard that was clearly in ill health. It looked like it was having some kind of seizure, and it looked like it was on its last leg. So our first impulse was to go online and look, and it said, well, give it some water and some lettuce. And then we looked online and we did that. And then we read up more, and it said, never give it water and lettuce. And it was kind of
of
like,
course.
and there's people, it, online therapy, that would make us more lonely. I'm fearful of that. There are good people who do that. I also think we should encourage people to connect with people.
Yes.
We need to make avenues to do that. I think there is a way to use technology to do that. I think part of what you did, I don't know if people know this, but there was this weird thing where people were sort of, yeah, feeling around, trying to figure out what to do. And then once a week, Shane would come on playing the piano. I can't remember, was it on Facebook or
It's
LinkedIn?
Facebook. Yeah, yeah.
On
Thanks for
Facebook.
bringing
There was this guy who I knew from 30, just
it.
randomly played. Sometimes you'd bring your kids in.
Yep, yep.
And you created kind of a following for that. And then other people started to do stuff like that, where they not only were there performing one way, but you were creating a community for people. I think there's a way to do that online, and I wish there were more of that to be able to take care of that. I think
Yeah,
one of the things that was great about there weren't a lot of things that were great about the pandemic, but one of the things that was great about the technology during the pandemic is there was a way to bring a group of students together to make them feel connected when they were locked, depending on what country they were in pretty dire circumstances. And the technology allowed us to do that, and it brought us together. So we know we can do it. It's always ideal to be in person and to connect with people because of the serendipity that goes on. It's the hallway moments. It's the things that you or I are going to think of once we stop talking that we wish we had remembered to say, but we're not in the same state, so we can't do that. But anytime we can use technology to try to bring ourselves closer together would be great.
we're in the early stages. I mean, basically, AI is in its infancy, and a lot of folks talk about a future where we'll have avatars, and AI will know so much about us that, I teach music lessons on the side, and it could take my whole style and approach and replicate that to 100 people. And perhaps I mean, you're the expert on business and ethics, and you could answer 1,000 people asking you questions about the topic. What do you think about that? And from an ethical standpoint, is that good?
If you wanted to use it for that, you get to make that choice if you want to do that. I think one of the things that's interesting to me is that there is a video that they produced during the pandemic that they asked me if I would do a 30-minute video on how to write an opinion column. So I did a 30-minute video, and it's on YouTube,
Sure. Okay.
and people watch it, and people say nice things about it. They watch it. Um, this past Wednesday, um, the students were told they could watch the video ahead of time. or come to this 90-minute lecture where they could interact, ask questions, do all that. Everyone showed up. Uh, and it became clear, and it was the same. As I've told you in person, I have a very limited set of skills. It's not like I'm going to change I'm Liam Neeson and take it. It became clear when I ask a question, I'll say, "That's great. How did you know that?" They said, "Well, I saw your video." But I think what they got out of that is that throughout the conversation, they could ask questions. So they could ask questions of me. I paired them up. They could work with one another. What they're missing in that lesson is, are am I doing this right? Do you teach guitar or
Uh,
piano?
piano, piano.
Piano. So you're teaching piano. Am I doing this right? Are my hands right?
Mhm.
Can you see this? There's the avatar, the video, the AI might be a way to get them started, to get thinking about this, but it doesn't replace the ability to ask the instructor, ask the human being, what am I doing here that I could do better? It could be they're not doing anything wrong. It
Exactly.
could be they couldn't do anything better, but they don't have that ability to regain that confidence from that human connection. And that human connection is yet to be replaced. And I don't know yet how AI will totally replace that human connection. It can sort of be a fake Shane. It could have your voice, it could have your basic techniques. But if I ask it a question that doesn't happen to be something you've taught a lesson about before, we're done. So I think it just there. So it's I think there's always a value to the human element for that. And as you go on, what'll happen is, as the human connection, you being the human, you're going to find that as people ask you questions as you're teaching, at least I know this, every semester I learn something new from my students, and it alters how I teach. So, my faculty assistant always wonders why it takes me so long to write a syllabus for the same course I've taught for 700 years. And that's because the readings change, the lessons change. The basic overall objective doesn't change, but how we get there changes. Some of that's because technology, we have additional technology, but some of it is because I learn from the students how to get something across to them even better.
I almost feel like, my kids are growing up in a world where they always had screens. Scares me a little bit, but hopefully there'll be a little bit of a return to family dinners and the importance of that, grabbing coffee, the in-hall conversations. You don't get that with technology, and we've gotta really come back to that.
Right. I think that's great. Even if it's at least one meal a day, whether it's breakfast or dinner, if it's possible to do that, that seems to make sense. It was weird. My father died in May of 2020, so right at the beginning of the pandemic. Then my sister died in October,
I'm sorry.
and for each of their thanks for each of their funerals, they were both. I never lived where they lived, but they both at the time lived in Minnesota, different places. And had they had, their families were spread out all over the place. Had the ceremony been held in person, I mean, obviously, I would have flown out there if I could have.
Mhm.
And,
Sure.
but the great grandkids and not everybody would have, and cousins, not everybody would have been able to go. It was amazing to see just the number of people who showed up for the ceremony online. I think we did a Zoom ceremony, and the rabbi in both cases, went to the cemetery, and I think the groundskeepers just held a phone
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
videotaped the casket as it was going in. That was a way of bringing us together. We had regular meetings with, it's better to do it in person,
Amen.
and we need to do that in school too. I think one of the things that's nice about this program that I just taught, the mid-career program, it's a one-year program for students who have been out for a while. I think it's every Tuesday afternoon, maybe from 2 to 4. They all are in the same auditorium, and they design what the curriculum is going to be. So they come from, like, they're pretty accomplished. Some of them are diplomats, or they've diffused minds, or they're something. They'll decide who's going to give a presentation that day, and then they have the cafeteria bring pizza. They used to have beer, but now they just have soft drinks. But they're there, and they're, as a community, they do that. The international students, I don't know if they still do this, but across from us is an IHOP, an International House of Pancakes. It's right across the road from where my office is. The international students the MPAs used to decide every once a week on a particular morning, they would all meet at the IHOP because they thought it was funny because it was the International House of
National, yes.
Bakery, and they took it on themselves, and that was a big deal. And the Kennedy School had a policy where if 6 or 9 students want to take a professor to lunch, the school will pay for it.
That's great.
Um, so
That's
so
great.
the students get a free lunch, and I think often they enjoy the free lunch more than they do my company. But they can choose who the professor is, and the school will pay for it. So I think that's a great thing to do for students to take advantage of that stuff, and it's great for us because it gets us to meet students we won't have in class. So anything we can do like that, and for the sole entrepreneur, it's tough. So you have your group who you work with there, whether it's John and others, but I think it's important to create that kind of stuff because not only is it that sort of lack of loneliness, it's also you get ideas, you sort of you get, and it also it gets you over that middle of the night panic where you think the whole world is crashing down and no one knows you're alive. I could die in my office tomorrow and no one would discover me for 2 weeks. That feels really really hard, and it feels most severe in the middle of the night when no one's around. And then if you carry that on throughout the day where you feel lonely, that's not good. So creating some kind of outlet in some kind of way just to touch base with people and connect, um, even if it's just somebody telling you, calm down. And AI is not going to do that.
No, not
Well,
at
it
all.
will. It will. It will tell you, I hear what you're saying, and that it will tell you very canned things that sound very much like it's mimicking a therapist, but it doesn't. AI does not care about you.
I'm going to end with the big existential question. A lot of people, very smart people, say AI is the end of the world. Others say it's key to a better future. You're an authority on ethics. Where do you fall on that spectrum, and what factors do you think will ultimately tip the scale either way?
I don't. I don't. You're asking me a binary choice, and I don't think it's either.
Okay.
I don't mean to waffle. I don't mean to be like the economist who has three hands. On the one hand, on the other hand, on the other hand. But I don't think it's the end of the world. I think it's going to make some things really challenging and a really different and a very not. Some challenges are great, but in a very not great way. It's going to make some things really challenging because it's going to make some bad things easier to do. I also think it's going to be have a very positive thing. I think if we can use it as a teaching tool for people who don't have access right now, it could be very positive for doing that thing. If we can learn to speak with one another in different languages, even if it's rudimentary, it could be positive. I don't think it's going to be make us even. It's not going to make us better people, and it's not going to be the end of the world. I think the thing we need to do is just never lose sight of it's only as good as the human connection, and if we can keep the sense of values that we have as a person, if we are a miserable human being who doesn't care about other people, we can use AI to benefit ourselves to be an even better miserable human being who doesn't care about people. But if we have values that respect integrity and honesty and and um, and kindness,
Yes.
curiosity, it can be a great tool. But I think that doesn't come from the AI; that comes from us. And I think people should be more curious about AI. This sounds very much like Ted Lasso, I think. You should be curious instead of fearful. We should be curious. We should be skeptical about everything, but we should be curious about it and not let it take over our lives without thinking hard about it and giving some thought to about it. But if we keep our values as human beings, so if we're running a company, we know the use of it and we have a clear understanding of that and don't lose sight of that just because it's easy to use. I think the values being infused within it, and we already have a hard time doing that as a distance from the CEO to the employee on the floor becomes larger. It's harder for the CEO to understand what that person's going through. We need to get better at that.
Mhm. Great discussion. Thank you so much. I learned a lot, like I always do.
Did we
What
fix everything?
We fixed it all, and I want you to tell people where they can find your column and buy your book.
um, the most recent book is um, what is it? The Simple Art of Business Etiquette,
Yes.
which is out there, and that's which has been recreated into knockoff books illegally
Boy.
by AI.
Hey, there you go.
But the Simple Art of Business Etiquette is out on various public platforms and bookstores. There's a collection of Right Thing columns, but if they go to, I think the Tribune site, but my site is jeffreyseglin.com. If they just go to jeffreyseglin.com, the column goes out in newspapers around the country, and they can find that on Muckrack, Muckrack. That lists the various newspapers where it appears, and then MSN carries it every Tuesday, and then I put it on the blog on the following Sunday.
Well, thanks again. Thanks everyone who tuned in. See you on the next really excellent discussion, Red Talk from Redwood City. I'm Shane McLaughlin. That was Jeff Seglin. See you next time.